Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We continue on with our differences, and from the valid differences is pertaining to the shuf'ah or the preemption. The shuf'ah takes place in all those buildings which have shared ownership and they cannot be divided. But the shuf'ah does not apply to the other shared ownerships which can be divided. The wisdom behind the shuf'ah is that if one partner sells off his share of the land or the house or building, then the new owner may not be liked very much by the original second owner. So if A and B share a land or a building, A sells his share to person C. Person C may be hated to person B. And so to preserve the rights of person B has the right to take this share of person A from person C. So person A is not allowed to sell this to person C unless he first offers his share to person B. If he does sell it to person C, then person B has the right to take it from person C, giving the money of course, which person C paid to person A, and person B has the right to do this even if person C objects to it. His objection counts for nothing, and this is all to preserve the right of person B. And some ulama say that as for other than land, then there is no shuf'ah in this. So for example, if two people share in the ownership of a car, person A sells his share to person C, so these scholars say that person B does not have the right to shuf'ah because the car is not land, and that the shuf'ah only applies to land. And other scholars say that it applies to all those types of ownerships which cannot be divided up. So this applies then to land, to buildings, to cars, or to any shared ownership which cannot be divided up. And in the narration of Jabir ibn Abdullah, he says, قَضَى النَّبِيُّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ بِالشُّفْعَةِ فِي كُلِّ مَا لَمْ يُقْسَمْ. That the Prophet gave the ruling of shuf'ah in all that ownership which cannot be divided. فَإِذَا وَقَعَتِ الْحُدُودُ وَصُرِّفَتِ الطُّرُقُ فَلَا شُفْعَةَ. But he says, if the land has borders, the hudud, and the entrance or the pathways leading to it are different, then there's no shuf'ah, because now the land is different. It is clearly divided. Person A owns this much and person B owns this much. It is clearly divided and delineated. Now in this narration, the second part of the narration speaks specifically about land, but the first part of the narration speaks about everything which is not divided, land or otherwise. So we take from the generality of this narration, not from the specificity of the narration. And those ulama who said that the shuf'ah is only in land, they took from the specific part of this narration which speaks about land. But we say no, it is more worthy to take from the general part. Why? Because it gives us more knowledge than just the specific part. And then just reasoning it out, if we take the example of the car, then yes, we find that the harm still applies to person B, in that person B may not like person C. So that justification still exists, so therefore the ruling ought to still exist. So we say the matter of shuf'ah revolves around one crucial issue. Can the shared ownership be divided or not? If it is something that's not divided, shuf'ah applies. If it is something that is divided, then shuf'ah does not apply. And also from the valid differences is about where the wakala applies. The wakala or agency, when somebody does something on your behalf, it does not apply to when it comes to acts of ibadah, which are fard ayn, which somebody has to do by himself. So for example, you cannot appoint somebody to perform the salah on your behalf, or the wudu on your behalf. And also the wakala does not apply into those rights of other people where the obligation is upon you individually. So for example, in a court case you have to give a testimony. You must give the testimony. You're not allowed to send somebody else to give the testimony on your behalf. This is required by you in person. Or for example, sharing out and dividing time equally between the wives. You cannot appoint somebody else to do this on your behalf. This is something required personally and individually by you. And then we have those situations in which the wakala does apply. And this is pertaining to contracts and annulments of contracts and financial rights. So for example, a person has to perform hajj, but he is unable to do so. Maybe he's too weak and old, and of course you're not going to recover from that, but he does have money. So here wakala does apply, even though this is an act of worship. But for this we do have evidence. that somebody can perform Hajj on your behalf if you are unable to perform it yourself and you're not going to recover from your condition. What about if you have a servant and you appoint somebody else to free your servant? We say yes, this is permissible. This is about financial affairs and contracts and annulments, and you can appoint somebody else to do the work on your behalf. What about the contract of marriage? Can a man send another man to agree on a marriage contract on his behalf? So person A, who wants to get married and wants to enter into this contract with the other woman, send person B to agree on this contract. The answer here is yes, because this is from the affairs of the contracts and annulments of contracts and so on, and you are allowed to appoint somebody to make a contract on your behalf, just like a sales contract. And it also applies from the other side. So the father of the woman who is going to enter into this contract, the father is the wali, of course. Now this wali can appoint another person to act on his behalf and to agree to the contract and to give the woman in marriage. Because even though the other person is a wakil, he's not the father of the woman, but he is appointed by the father of the woman. So he takes the same place as the father of the woman. And so because this comes under the heading of contracts and annulments of contracts, then this is permissible. And from the valid differences is the difference between a yameen, which is an oath, and a nadhr, which is a vow. So when it comes to a yameen, which is an oath, then the point of a yameen or an oath is that you are encouraging yourself to do something or discouraging yourself from doing something, or is to make the other person believe you, or it is to belie someone else. So to make the other person believe you is to say, Wallahi, this is true. Or to belie someone else is to say, Wallahi, this is not true. And a kafara applies if you take an oath that you're going to do something or not do something, and you end up breaking the oath, the kafara there would apply. As for another, it is when a person obligates an act of ibadah on himself, either in the absolute sense, or if he hinges this ibadah on a future event. And this particular act of ibadah is not made obligatory upon him by the sharia, so rather he makes it obligatory upon himself. Now with another, you have to fulfill it, because you must perform this act of ibadah. And the kafara here does not apply, as long as the intention here is a vow to perform an act of worship to draw closer to Allah Jalla wa Ala. As for the other types of nadhr, then they take the same ruling as the yameen. The Prophet ﷺ said, Man nadhara an yuti' Allah falyuti'. Whoever makes a vow to perform an act of obedience to Allah, then let him obey Allah. So the nadhr in which you intend to perform an act of goodness for the sake of Allah Jalla wa Ala, then here you must fulfill it. Now somebody could make a nadhr that he will perform a particular act of worship. For example, he will fast for 1 month. Just like that, he leaves it in the absolute sense. Okay, then you have to fast for 1 month. You can't just say, oh, I will not fast for 1 month and I will offer the kafara. This is not permissible. Or for example, somebody may say, if Allah makes me pass my exams, I will fast for 1 month. So now he's hinged this act of worship on a future event. And this future event is the ni'mah or the blessing of him passing his exams. Or he might say, if Allah heals me from this terrible illness, I will fast for 1 month. So now he's hinged this act of ibadah on a future event, which is the ni'mah of this harm being removed from him. So one is the attainment of something positive, and the other one is the removal of something negative. As for if he makes a nadhr and he does not fulfill this nadhr, then he comes under the statement of Allah Jalla wa Ala in Surah At-Tawbah, وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ عَاهَدَ اللَّهَ لَئِنْ آتَانَا مِنْ فَضْلِهِ لَنَصَّدَّقَنَّ وَلَنَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ. And from them is the one who makes a contract with Allah that if he gives us from his grace, meaning some wealth, then we will surely give sadaqah and we will surely be from the righteous. فَلَمَّا آتَاهُمْ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ بَخِلُوا بِهِ وَتَوَلَّوْا وَهُمْ مُعْرِضُونَ. But when he gave them from his grace, they became stingy with it and they turned away in aversion. فَأَعْقَبَهُمْ نِفَاقًا فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ إِلَى يَوْمِ يَلْقَوْنَهُ بِمَا أَخْلَفُ اللَّهَ مَا وَعَدُوهُ وَبِمَا كَانُوا يَكْذِبُونَ. So Allah put nifaq or hypocrisy in their hearts up until the day of judgment because of their breaking the promise with Allah and because of their lying. So such is the punishment of the one who makes a vow and then, without any reason whatsoever, does not fulfill the vow. He is threatened with nifaq in his heart. Now this applies to the nadhr at-tabarrur, the nadhr of birr, where you seek to gain a closeness to Allah with this act of ibadah. There are other types of nudhur which take the same ruling as not of a nadhr but of a yameen, or an oath. And this is a nadhr to encourage him to do something or to discourage him from doing something. So for example, he wants to force himself not to speak to Amr, let's say. So he says that I have a nadhr for Allah that I will not speak to Amr. Now he has made a vow not to speak to Amr. This is just like him saying, Wallahi, I will not speak to Amr. And so it takes the ruling of a yameen. If he does speak to Amr, he can do that, but he will have to offer the kafara. And so here he does have a choice. Or for example, he is committing some sins and he wants to force himself not to commit this particular sin. And he says, against me, for Allah, there is a nadhr, there is a vow, that if I do such and such a sin, then I will fast for 1 year. And he says this to force himself not to commit this particular sin which he is committing. But let us suppose afterwards he does commit this sin. Well, this nadhr had the intention of a yameen, of an oath. He did not intend to fast the 1 year in and of itself. Rather, what he actually intended was not to commit that particular sinful action. That was his original intention, not the fasting in and of itself. So because of this intention then, this nadhr takes the same ruling as a yameen, as an oath. So if he did commit this sin, then he would have to offer the kafara for a yameen. And Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah pointed out a difference when it comes to talaq, or a divorce, which is hinged on a future event. So for example, a man says to his wife, when the month of Sha'ban begins, you are divorced. So here, when the month of Sha'ban begins, she is divorced, because he has intended the divorce in and of itself. Contrast that with this following example. He says to his wife, if you speak to Amr, you are divorced. Now here, if she speaks to Amr, she's not necessarily divorced, because the husband did not intend the divorce in and of itself. What did he really intend? He really intended to prevent his wife from speaking to Amr. And he used this divorce simply as a threat and not something which is meant in and of itself. So if he hinges the divorce on an event so as to encourage his wife to do something, or to discourage her to do something, or to make her believe what he is saying, or to belie what she is saying, if this is the intention, then the divorce does not count. Rather, this simply takes the ruling of an oath, in which there is a kafara. So for example, if he says to his wife, if you speak to Amr, you are divorced, this does not count as a divorce. Rather, this is as if he was to say, Wallahi, you will not speak to Amr. This is taking an oath against his wife. If his wife speaks to Amr, he simply has to offer the kafara of the breaking of an oath. Now the difference between the Sha'ban example should be clear, because we know in the Sha'ban example he had to have meant and intended the divorce in and of itself, because we know Sha'ban is going to come. It's not like you can discourage Sha'ban from entering. Of course, day by day, Sha'ban will eventually arrive. Whereas on the other hand, it is not necessary that his wife will speak to Amr. That is her choice. However, if he was to say, if you speak to Amr, you are divorced, it can still count as a divorce if that was his intention. Because it could be that this husband has extreme ghairah, and that he does not want to keep any woman as a wife who will even speak to another man. So if this is the case, then yes, the divorce will count. So in the latter example then, it depends on his intention. And this is a subtle difference which we need to know about. What about if he hinges the divorce on the action of someone other than his wife? For example, if a guest arrives at his house, he wants to honor his guest, but the guest wants to sacrifice the animal for the meat. Now the host says, no, how can you, the guest, sacrifice the animal? I should sacrifice the animal for you, not you sacrificing the animal, because I am the host. The guest says, no, I want to sacrifice the animal. And the host says, if you sacrifice the animal, my wife is divorced. If now the guest sacrifices the animal, is the host's wife divorced? Well, let us analyze the situation. Does the host actually intend the wife to be divorced, meaning the divorce in and of itself? Well, the circumstantial evidence tells us that this is not possible. How can he possibly intend this? Rather, what he intends is to strongly discourage the guest from sacrificing the animal, because if the guest knows that if he sacrifices the animal, the host's wife will be divorced, then this will discourage him from sacrificing the animal. So here, the intention of the host is not the divorce per se, but rather it is, in fact, to discourage the guest from sacrificing the animal. Hence, if the guest did sacrifice the animal, the divorce would not occur, because this was not the host's intention. And from the weak differences is the difference of when you make things haram for yourself. So a man can make his wife haram for himself, and this would be the zihar, which we have spoken about in the presentations of fiqh. And he can also make haram on himself food, clothing, and so on. So as for the wife then, if he makes her haram for himself, this takes the ruling of the zihar, and this incurs a kafara before he has intercourse with her. As for the other things, food and clothing and so on, which he makes haram for himself, then this takes the ruling of a yameen or an oath for which he must offer the expiation. And that's the kafara for the yameen. This is not the kafara for the zihar. There are two different expiations here. And this difference here is on the opinion of the Hanbali madhab. And what is correct on this issue is that if he makes his wife haram for himself, it would be the same as if he was to make a servant woman haram for himself as well. And they both take the ruling of a yameen or an oath. Similarly, if he makes haram for himself the clothing or food, it takes the ruling of a yameen, which is an oath which has to be expiated. As Allah Jalla wa Ala says, when the Prophet ﷺ made honey haram for himself, Ya ayyuhan nabiyyu, lima tuharrimu ma ahalla Allahu lak, tabtaghi mardata azwajik, wallahu ghafurur rahim, qad farada Allahu lakum, tahillata aymanikum, wallahu mawlakum, wa huwa al-alimul hakim. O Prophet, why do you make haram for yourself what Allah has made halal, seeking to please your wives, and Allah is the forgiving, the merciful? Allah has ordained for you to expiate your oaths, and Allah is your Mawla, your helper, and He is the knowledgeable, the wise. So when you make haram for yourself what Allah has made haram, this is an oath which must be expiated for. And this is general. It includes making haram for yourself your wife, your servant woman, food, clothing, anything. So what about zihar then, when a man says to his wife, you are like the back of my mother to me? In other words, you are haram for me to have intercourse with. So if he says that to his wife, and he says to his wife, you are haram for me, we say the zihar is far, far worse, because his wife is very halal for him. No other woman is more halal for him than his wife, and his mother is the most haram woman for him. So he's resembled the most halal woman for him to the most haram woman for him. And this is clearly a far more ugly deed, and hence incurs a far severer kafara, or a far severer expiation. So if he uses the words of zihar, then that is clearly zihar, and there's no doubts or ambiguity in that. But if he says that you are haram for me, then we have to inquire further. If he just meant a news item, you are haram for me, then we have simply said you have lied. She is not haram for you. And Ibn Abbas has said that if a man says to his wife, you are haram for me, he says this is nothing, meaning it does not take any ruling or does not have any consequences, and she is not haram for him. But if he says to his wife, you are haram for me, and he intends thereby that you are haram for me to have intercourse with, and she happens to be in her menses at that point, then we say, yes, you have spoken the truth. She is haram for you to have intercourse with. And if he says to his wife, you are haram for me, seeking to give a ruling that you are haram for me as a hukum shar'i, then of course this is a false ruling. The madhab of the Hanabila says that this is zihar, and the weightier opinion is, no, it's not zihar. It simply takes the ruling of an oath, as if he was to say, for example, milk is haram for me, and he has to offer an expiation. But if he says, you are haram for me, intending thereby the zihar, then we say, yes, this is the zihar, and the expiation here would not be the expiation or the kafara for the yameen, for the oath, rather it would be the kafara for the zihar. The difference between the expiation of the yameen and the zihar, for the yameen it is to feed 10 poor people from the average of what you feed your family, or to clothe them if you cannot do so, or to free a believing servant. And if you cannot do these three, then it is to fast 3 consecutive months. As for the kafara of the zihar, it is to free a believing servant. If you cannot do this, it is to fast 2 consecutive lunar months. And if you cannot do this, it would be to feed 60 poor people. So then, according to the correct opinion, notice the difference. When he says to his wife, you are haram for me, here we say it depends on your intention. As for if he says to his wife, you are like the back of my mother, or like the back of any woman who is clearly haram for him to have intercourse with, then this takes the same ruling as the dhihar. And it does not matter on the intention here, because the words speak for themselves. And also from the valid differences, if he takes a laghwul yameen, which is that he takes an oath not intending the oath. So this is the wallahi which just runs off the tongues of people without them really thinking about it and intending any oath. So in an oath like this, there is no sin nor any kafara. And the laghwul yameen can also be that he takes an oath on something which happened in the past, and it turns out it did not happen the way he took an oath for. He says, Wallahi, Zayd arrived from his holiday yesterday. And we investigate, no, Zayd did not arrive from his holiday yesterday. So this type of oath does not have a kafara to it. And neither is he sinful because he believed to the best of his ability that Zayd arrived yesterday. Maybe he had some indication to tell him this. Or perhaps some false news came to him and he believed it. So he took an oath on what he deemed to be most likely. And you are allowed to take an oath on what you deem to be most likely. However, on the other hand, if he takes an oath that he will do something in the future or not do something in the future, intending thereby a valid oath, then if he breaks that, it does incur a kafara. The evidence, Allah Jalla wa Ala says, لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم. Allah will not take you to account for your unintentional oaths. So this is the type of oath which just runs on the tongue without you thinking about it. A father might threaten his child, Wallahi, if you leave the house, I will break your bones. Now he has taken an oath here to break the bones of his son. If the son, who is grounded, does leave the house, does the father actually intend to break his bones? Well, no, this oath did not have the intention of an oath, something which you have a firm resolution to do. Rather, this oath was by intention of threatening the child not to leave the house. So if his son leaves the house and the father does not break his bones, do we say the father has broken the oath? The answer is no, because there was no oath to begin with. Rather, that was a laghwul yameen. Okay, what about if he says, Wallahi, Zayd will return tomorrow from his journey. And he says this because he has good reasons to believe that Zayd will arrive tomorrow from his journey. And tomorrow comes, but Zayd did not arrive. We say there is no expiation for him because when he took this oath, he had good reasons to believe that he is truthful. He did not intend to lie. And in the hadith in the Sahihain, when the man had intercourse with his wife during the day of Ramadan, he was told to take the crate of dates and to give it in charity to poor people. He said, أَعْلَى أَفْقَرَ مِنِّي يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. Should I give it to somebody poorer than me, O Messenger of Allah? وَاللَّهِ مَا بَيْنَ لَابِتَيْهَا أَهْلُ بَيْتٍ أَفْقَرُ مِنِّي. Wallahi, there is no family between the 2 mountains of Al-Madinah who is poorer than me. We know that the man could not be sure that this is the case. He does not know every family in Al-Madinah. But he spoke out of the ghalabatul dhann, what was predominant in his thoughts. The second evidence of taking an oath in accordance with the ghalabatul dhann is the evidence we have of al-qasama, where the narration tells us that the 2 companions, Muhayyisa and Abdullah ibn Sahal, went out to Khaybar. They parted from each other. Then when Muhayyisa saw Abdullah ibn Sahal, he was dead. So he came to the Prophet, he and his brother Huwayyisa, and the brother of Abdullah ibn Sahal, Abdurrahman ibn Sahal. So these 3 came to the Prophet. They claimed that the Yahud killed Abdullah ibn Sahal. And so the Prophet asked them to take 50 oaths that the man accused has killed Abdullah ibn Sahal. They said that we cannot take an oath on something we haven't witnessed. Then the Prophet told them, but then the Yahud will take 50 oaths and they will be free from the murder. They replied, but how can we accept the oath of kuffar? So then the Prophet paid the blood money from the Bayt al-Mal. Now the point here is that the Prophet asked them to take an oath. Now they did not witness this murder, but if they did take an oath, they'd be taking an oath in accordance with the ghalabatul dhann, because they deemed it most likely that the Yahud killed Abdullah ibn Sahal. So herein then are two evidences which tell us that you are allowed to take an oath in accordance with your ghalabatul dhann. As for an oath in which there is a kafara, then you take an oath to do something or not to do something. For example, one person says, Wallahi, I will not speak to Zayd. Then he regrets it because making hijrah or abandoning a fellow Muslim is haram. So he regrets this, and so he says, no, he does want to speak now. We tell him that yes, it is better for you to speak to Zayd and to expiate the oath. And it makes no difference in which order you do it. Either you can speak to Zayd and then expiate the oath, or you can expiate the oath and then speak to Zayd. We have evidence for both. But in all cases, you do that which is better. So if breaking the oath is in fact better, as in our example here, then you break the oath and you offer the expiation. But if keeping the oath would be better, then you keep the oath. So you do that which is better always. And from the weak differences is that some of the fuqaha have said that if a person takes an oath to do something or not to do something, and then he breaks the oath, either forgetfully or through ignorance or through being forced, then there is no sin or kafara upon him, but the oath still stands. Whereas if this was to happen in a divorce situation or a freeing of a servant, the itq situation, then even forgetfully or through ignorance or through being forced, the divorce or freedom would take place. So to give examples to illustrate this, a person says, Wallahi, I will not wear this particular shirt. And then the next day he simply forgets and wears the shirt. Do we say he has a kafara? The answer is no. He simply has to take the shirt off immediately and not wear it in the future. Or for example, he thinks that this shirt is in fact another shirt and he wears it. Then he realizes this is the shirt for which he took an oath. What do we say? Has he broken the oath? Is there sin upon him? Is there a kafara upon him? The answer is no. There is no kafara. He simply takes that shirt off and does not wear it in the future again. Or perhaps he was forced to wear this shirt where somebody threatened his life unless he wears this shirt, and then he wears it. We say again, there is no kafara upon him. It's just that in the future he does not wear this shirt through his own choice. However, if he says to his wife, if you speak to Zayd, you are divorced, and thereby he does not intend an oath, rather he intends an actual divorce. And so he says, Wallahi, you will be divorced if you speak to Zayd. Now, if the wife forgetfully speaks to Zayd, is she divorced? Some fuqaha say that yes, she is divorced. Or for example, if she is forced to speak to Zayd, if somebody threatens her life unless she speaks to Zayd, and she does so, then what do we say? Is she divorced? Some fuqaha say yes, she is divorced. Or for example, she speaks to a person whom she thinks is not Zayd, and then she realizes, oh hang on, this is in fact Zayd. So is she divorced? Again, some fuqaha say that yes, in a case like this, she is divorced. But what is correct here is that in all of these cases, she is not divorced. Because if an oath is broken through ignorance or forgetfulness or being forced or coercion, then the oath has not been broken. So the point is that the weak difference which they draw is that they make a difference between forgetfulness, ignorance and coercion in a case of an oath, and that it does not require any expiation and that its presence is like its absence, so it can be overlooked. So between that and forgetfulness, ignorance or coercion in a case of a divorce or the freeing of a servant. They say that ignorance, forgetfulness and coercion is not an excuse when it comes to divorce or freeing of a servant, but it is an excuse when it comes to oaths. And what we say is that the correct opinion is that ignorance, forgetfulness and coercion is an excuse in all of these cases. And also from the subtle differences which the ulama have pointed out, when it comes to a divorce and the husband issues a divorce using clear-cut words like you are divorced, then this does not require any intention. So if the man says you are divorced, and then of course the divorce counts, but then he regrets it and he said, oh no, but I didn't actually intend a divorce, and your deeds are by intention, of course, aren't they? We do not accept this. The words are clear-cut, the words speak for themselves, and you cannot play games now by saying that I did not intend it. So if the matter is taken to the court, it's an easy decision for the qadi. He will judge that this is a divorce, clear-cut, easy. But then on the other hand, you could have words which could carry either meaning. They could carry the meaning that she's divorced, or perhaps she's not divorced. Now here it does depend on the intention of the husband. If the husband uses ambiguous words, and the woman thinks that he meant divorce, and now he's claiming he did not mean divorce, if she thinks that he is lying and she has reasons to believe this, then she can take him to the court. Otherwise, if the husband is known to be truthful, then it is best to take him at his word. So, for example, the husband says to his wife, "Anti taliq, you are divorced," then this is clear cut. Now, if he claims that by taliq he actually meant somebody who is let loose, because that's what talaq is about, to let something loose as opposed to tie it up. So he says, no, what I meant was that you are let loose or you are free from any rope tying you. Then the hakim will not accept this intention of his. Why? Because he used clear-cut words of divorce. But this is if the wife takes him to court. Otherwise, the wife inside the house could just take him for his word. She could say, okay, I accept what you mean here. And that's fine, then she will not be divorced. But if she takes him to the court, then we will judge by that which is apparent. And what is apparent to us is that he has divorced the wife and his intention does not play a role here. And as for ambiguous words, then we accept the husband's word when he says that he intended such and such, because we need to look at his intention now when it comes to ambiguous words, not the clear-cut words. And again here we're talking about a court case, so we are talking from the qadi's standpoint of view. If he uses words which are ambiguous and he claims what he intended is that which is other than the apparent meaning of the words, then the judge will not accept his claim here. Because if he claims something other than the apparent meaning, we don't accept it. We gave an example with the talaq, even though the words taliq are clear-cut, but he says, no, I intended that you are free from any ropes tying you. This is definitely against what is apparent, and the qadi cannot judge in accordance with what the man claims here. He has to judge with that which is apparent, and adjudge this case to be a divorce. So what we are talking about here are those words which could carry two or more meaning, and all of these meanings are valid for the particular word, but the husband claims he intended by this word or words a meaning which is very, very unlikely to be the case. So if the meaning is very, very unlikely to be the case, then we do not pay any attention to that, even if the husband claims that this is what he meant. We would only accept his intention if the words reasonably allow for his intention. So notice this crucial point here. Now the question is, does his wife take him to the court if he claims that he intended a meaning other than that which is apparent from the words which he used? Well, we ask the wife, is your husband known to be truthful and righteous? If he is, then you do not take him to court, because he is most probably telling the truth, because this is what we know from his history. And so we have to use inductive reasoning here, because this is the best we can do. As for if she knows her husband to be a liar and not righteous and somebody who does not take the Sharia seriously, then we say you must take him to court. Even if he prevents you, then you must, even by phone, or you appoint someone else to get in contact with the court. You must do this, because we cannot have anyone playing with the Sharia of Allah Jalla wa Ala. If she feels in doubt, maybe he is telling the truth, maybe he is lying, she's not sure, she's perhaps 50-50 or thereabouts, then we say it is safer not to take him to court, because the asl is, the default ruling is that marriage still stands, and we ought not to break this marriage up unless we have a very strong and intellectually swaying reason to do so. Okay, let's take some review questions. Question number 1. Give some examples of where the wakala applies and examples where wakala does not apply. Give 2 examples for each. Question number 2. Give the difference in ruling where a person says to his wife, you are haram for me, and a person says to his wife, you are like the back of my mother. How are these 2 scenarios different? Question number 3. If a man says to his son, Wallahi, if you leave the house, I will break your bones. What do you say about an oath like this? Does it have a kafara? Explain your answer.